Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of the Anime as Spirituality podcast on Substack and YouTube once I'm able to get it uploaded on YouTube because my computer storage is saying, bitch, you thought. But anyways, I am the Cozy Sensei, the Cozy Sunflower. You can call me Aloye. I am the star of the show. And so are you in your own world. And this episode, we are talking about school. Specifically, we're talking about spirituality in education, and we are wrapping it in and around the Mob Psycho world because yes, we are still in our Mob Psycho series. And I want to talk about the importance of Mob being in school as our protagonist of spirituality, and the way that school and education and really middle school itself, which is just really as a high time of self-exploration of identity crises, meaning and reflections of who I am and who do I want to be, how all of that plays an integral role in Shigeo's character development, but also in our own spiritual development as young people developing in a world, in a society that doesn't prioritize the spiritual, emotional, and mental development of children as being valuable. If anything, we live in a society, we live in a world, in a culture that thinks that children don't know what's going on with themselves, don't know what's going on with their bodies and their minds. There's a limited amount of acceptance in general population that children, as human beings, as a class in society, not only are smart, capable, and insightful, but have agency and autonomy and awareness. And I completely disagree with all of that. I've spent enough time in my life, both as a student and as an early childhood and grade school educator with children, to be able to speak my piece. Well, I have a lot of pieces. And so this episode, I want to get into that because I love children. I am a fierce and ardent advocate and protector of children's rights and their gifts and autonomy and agency. I think that respecting children is the only way to heal this world, is the only way to actually make the world a better place for them as they and when they grow into adulthood. And we can see the ills of society stem and are rooted from the way that we treat women, of course, but children most especially, because if you can't even care about the most vulnerable in society, if you can't even concern yourself with the welfare of the least protected, you have already missed the most important point and part of being alive. And so this episode is exploring Mob's mentality as a student, but also the world around Mob, from his classmates to his friends that he develops to his family unit. And I do want to say this now, even though it should come at the end of this episode, but I want to separate Mob's family dynamic into its own episode because I think that there is something to unpack about every family system, but his family system and how that plays a role in his spiritual development and gifts as a psychic and as the most powerful psychic in his world. But I think that there's still so much to talk about around why, I think pop culture in general, but anime mangakas are very interested, if not obsessed. There is this heightened focus on stories and mangas and anime taking place in middle school and high school, specifically in shonen and shoujo, Of course, there are other genres of manga and anime like josei and seinen. I think I'm pronouncing this completely incorrectly, so if I am, I apologize. But that's the adult genre of shonen and shoujo, right? Seinen means young man in Japanese, and so seinen is for adolescent and adult men, whereas shonen, as we know, is for young and teen boys. And then there's shoujo for teen girls, and josei is for young adult women. Now that lesson is out of the way, let's get into what does spirituality and education mean, and how does that relate and connect to Mob Psycho 100 and grade school in anime in general. As Mob Psycho 100's introductory monologue for each season tells us,
whether you believe it or not, the world around you is filled with strange phenomena that science has yet to explain.
Spirituality is the formative force underlying reality. The underpinnings of being that we tend to call spiritual are our most authentic relationships to ourselves, to others, the universe, and the transcendent. And those underpinnings influence our personal health on levels that create a domino effect. It affects the health of our communities, our nations, and our world. And it impacts how we interact with others and how we interact with the planet. And so we can understand that spirituality within itself is many worlds in and of itself, because each individual person has this spiritual connection and existence, whether you believe in it, you acknowledge it or not. Thinking of Mob Psycho's monologue introduction, we recognize that each person has this spiritual connection or this spiritual bubble that exists within them and around them at all times. So if we're thinking of spirituality as a definition, what we understand is that it by nature is just going to be many and varied, because there are many different experiences that each individual person in this world, and there are 7.9 billion people in this world, have with spirituality.
And in those unfortunate moments when people come face to face with them, they are helplessly thrown into the dark depths of fear.
And so, of course, that muddies rather than clears the waters of discussion when we're talking about spirituality, because spirituality is often equated, and I think erroneously conflated, with religion and morality, where religion or morality represent public and private practices that may exclude people who don't believe in a particular belief system from the general conversation of the immaterial. Spirituality, at least the way that I use it and think about it, and it's definitely even more meta than what I can contain in one podcast episode. But spirituality is inclusive, and it recognizes the interrelatedness of all things. So to me, spirituality is everything and all things all the time and everywhere. Spirituality is the atmospheres, the air, it's water, as in like the ocean, it's space, it's gravity, it's the collective consciousness and the collective unconsciousness. And I believe that all stems and roots from one particular metaphysical source that I call God. And I don't think that God can be pigeonholed or even kidnapped by one religious thought, indoctrination, or moral bent. And the reason why is because if we are going to talk about religion and spirituality as being one and the same, we are going to cast out a lot of cultural understandings and references and personal connections with the spirit, capital S, that is already happening within students, within children, and within young minds.
But there are those who choose to fight against the darkness every day, shining a ray of hope into that chaos.
So to reach deep inside students where true learning takes place within their soul, within their minds, within their personal developing sense of self, teachers must do so from the most authentic sense of themselves. Because if you are not an authentic teacher, not only will your students pick up on that, because students can always tell when you're faking, when you're putting up a front. They don't like fake shit. Like, no student likes to be pandered to. Instead, if you pay attention to your favorite teachers, to the teachers that really resonated with you, whether you liked their subject or not, they probably came so real and so authentically to you and to your classmates that you couldn't help but look forward to their class period, loved interacting with them if they did not cross respectful lines and boundaries of adult-child relationships and respect. My point is, and it connects to what a researcher in spiritual education named Laura Jones says, spirituality in education refers to no more and no less than a deep connection between student, teacher, and subject. And that connection, at least to me, must be honest. It has to be so honest, so vital, so vibrant that it cannot help but be intensely relevant. I hated math growing up. I didn't really hate it. My brain doesn't work with numbers past algebra, and algebra was still like threw me for a loop. But every time I engaged with a teacher who made us feel safe learning these complex formulas, I was able to actually connect with my work and find math fun. But that is for a subject I didn't enjoy. For the subjects that I did enjoy, like art, psychology, philosophy, English, history, right, the humanities, what I realized is that it did not matter if I liked my teacher or not, if I was going to enjoy what I was learning, because I was. But the teachers that really connected with me, that I still remember our classroom environment, what we learned, what we read, how we engaged with each other as scholars and as sensei. It hits me still to this day in my grown adulthood how much a lot of that was dependent upon the classroom environment that the teacher created. And when I was teaching babies how to play and learn their fine and gross motor skills, and adults how to connect with their children, and first graders and second graders all the way to 10th graders, how to just be well-adjusted, emotionally regulated young people in a very chaotic and violent world, how to be students, right? How to learn to write, to read. I always wanted to show up as the safe teacher, the one who was going to respect you. I would always say to people when they would try to talk shit about my first graders, like, never underestimate the wisdom and insight of a 6-year-old, because if you do, you miss out on everything that makes you a human being. You can learn from anyone. And if you don't think you can learn from anyone, you're learning from no one, including yourself. And unfortunately, the teachers in Mob's world miss that mark. I cannot help but think about the way that his math teacher would make a fool of him and embarrass him publicly in class because he was too nervous to speak up and answer a question, telling him to stand up and really bringing him out of his comfort zone. And it's very obvious that Shigeo Kageyama is a very timid young man. And as an educator, something that is super important is to pay attention to the way your students are on an individual level. If you're going to connect with them, you have to understand who they are and how they respond. And I understand that it's a lot as an adult to think about tailoring every single message to each individual student in your class, but that is the responsibility of a teacher. And when you can see a teacher who doesn't give a fuck about their tone, about their messaging, about how they're delivering their subject matter, you see a teacher who has clocked out of nurturing and developing the next generation of our world. That's so unfortunate, because that means that teachers are not actually caring, those teachers are not actually caring about the spiritual core and development of each individual's soul in their classroom. That's important to understand and poke at, because spirituality is not a character trait. Spirituality is not just a word to be used in a valorizing way. It's not like this beneficent term. Instead, spirituality is connection. Rachel Kessler, who is a part of the team that developed the socio-emotional learning curriculum that is now moving through the United States school system, and she authored the book The Soul of Education, focused her research on teens, adolescents, because she noticed that the larger spiritual questions in adolescent age is meaning, identity, and responsibility. So personal responsibility and accountability. And when a child, when a young person is able to be connected with over what is the meaning of life, who are they as individuals, and what responsibility do they have towards themselves and towards the world, they develop balance, integrity, and connection. And these questions of meaning, identity, responsibility become more urgent to a young person at that time, because there's so much pressure when you are in middle school to fit in, to be cool, to be popular, to be liked, to be on the cutting edge of fashion and culture. And when you're unable to do that in an authentic way, when your home life is fractured, and when your sense of self and identity is fragmented or compartmentalized, when you're abused, traumatized, and you don't have an adult in your life, whether it's at home or, as we're talking about, in the schoolhouse, to be able to pull that out of you, more toxicity comes out, because students will turn inward and students will revolt and rebel against the adults in their lives and against themselves in explosive ways, because these questions of meaning, of identity, responsibility are being ignored and repressed in them. But if we think of spirituality as a means of addressing the mysteries and channeling an individual's energy constructively, we can, as Kessler asserted, recognize that the arc of adolescence bends towards connection. The arc of Mob Psycho and Mob's character development bends towards him finding friends, adults who recognize his gift and his power. That's what drew him to Reagan. And every single time that Conster showed up as being a real, genuine adult in Mob's life, it was when Reagan was reminding Mob of who he is as a person, that he is a good person, that though he is gifted, he is not special in a way that minimizes and dehumanizes the people around him, that he should not lose himself when he starts to develop friendships with people, from the Body Improvement Club to the Telepathy Club. These are individuals who are seeing him at his worst or his best, right? With the Telepathy Club trying to use his psychic powers, but are pulling out of him who he truly needs to be at the core. How important it is for young adults, children, for middle schoolers, high schoolers to have deep connections that resonate in positive ways, because students do yearn for deep connections to themselves and to others, to nature, and to a higher power. They do. And so if we consider spirituality as connection, we should also ask ourselves, what if spirituality was sacred? What if spirituality was considered a sacred act of connection? What if spirituality was a practice of wholeness and awareness? Because that's what sacredness is. And if we're thinking about the character development of Shigeo, if we're thinking about the character development of a 13-year-old child in your world, in your life, and you don't think that they're trying to figure out how to make all these different pieces of themselves fit together in a whole and aware and actualized way, you're missing it. Because sacredness is approaching, greeting, and meeting the world with basic respect. And it is the ground of learning because it is rooted in education if we practice it as a means of openness, attentiveness to experience, and sensitivity to the world. And so spirituality and education begins with questions of what is my experience? What is my effect? What are the interrelationships between myself and others? And are these being attended to? We know that these questions are important to ask because when we're talking about spirituality in education, we have to understand something else. We're all growing, whether we like it or not, whether we're aware of it or not. But for those who are aware and want to grow appropriately, you have to ask yourself, what am I growing into and where am I going with this growth? So we can consider spirituality as transcendence. Transcendence, as I am using it, refers to moving beyond our own psychological walls to experience more clearly the true nature of things. Transcendence comes from the Greek word epikastis. And it is the most important part of spirituality because it is a straining forward toward mystery, toward a luminous darkness, toward an insatiated desire for a meaning beyond meaning. Think about that. A desire for meaning beyond meaning. And if you think about how much of your teenage and adolescence experience is this major existential crisis of what am I? Who am I? Why am I? How should I act? Why should I do the right thing? Why should I be moral? These questions are asked every single time a student has to decide whether to lean into peer pressure or choose what they truly desire for themselves. Joan Halifax, an anthropologist and teacher, offered, spirituality is difficult for us to touch because it flows to and from the invisible, from love and the mystery of death. It flows from the ground of our relationship, not only between human beings, but also between all things, including mountains and rivers. It evokes within us compassion, which allows us to see through the eyes of innumerable beings. If we understand that education, as some have said, is learning to see with new eyes, or as I would like to say, learning to perceive with a new vision, then surely attending to spirituality, regardless of the existential benefits, is beneficial to the learning process. So in season 2, when Mob is running the marathon with the rest of his middle school, and he's doing his best to make it to the end because he wants to impress his crush, what he ends up doing is passing out. He pushes himself to his limit. And the first person that he sees when he opens his eyes is his teacher, asking him if he's okay. That teacher doesn't know that Mob is a psychic. That teacher doesn't know that Mob's motivation for trying his best to move up the ranks in his class, to move up the ranks in the race, was to impress a girl that he has had a crush on and, dare I say, even loved since he was a child. But that teacher still saw his effort. And he told Mob, hey, it's okay. You tried your best. And you should rest. And I think that is the sacredness of connection. That is the spirituality of an educator's role in a child's life, not berating a child or a student for not being able to answer a question on the board because they may not know the answer or because they're too nervous to say it out loud in front of their peers, for the fear of risking being wrong. But when that child is down, to see that child, to stay with that child, to be there when they wake up, when they open their eyes, when they see differently who they are and what they're learning about being alive. And that's why it's important to emphasize that spirituality is not religion. It is not. It can't be. And Professor Robert Nash distinguished the two terms, spirituality versus religion. Religion is the institution. Religion is what we do with others. It is a public faith. Religion is the head. And in contrast, spirituality is the personal. Spirituality is what we do within ourselves. It is a private faith. Spirituality is heart. When we are interacting with individuals, or when we are interacting on an interpersonal level rather, it is important to recognize that we are connecting with the spirituality of the individual. Because religion doesn't look at the individual, religion looks at the group, at the collective, at the whole, and says, this is the rule, this is the doctrine, and this is what you must do. Whereas spirituality looks at the individual's vital energy, looks at the individual's soul, their well-being, and it creates a meaning within our lives that pulls us into a greater sense of self. Because religion isn't really looking for you to be a better person. It's just like perform the better things. Spirituality is asking you to contemplate the meaning of your life and to add as an active agent in that what that looks like, the definitions, the actions, the behaviors that create that. And that's what students need. That's what Mob needed. Every single time he hit 100, he needed a reminder of what is the meaning of this power? Why do I have it? And why should I, even with the magnitude of my power, temper it? Why should I keep my heart soft and be forgiving to my brother? Why should I continue to act as though I'm obtuse and oblivious to the fact that my master is a con artist? And it's because I know he's a good person just trying to find his way. I think a lot of anime focus in on the middle schooler, the high schooler being the protagonist and saving the world is because the questions of our youth are the questions of life. We're not going to stop asking life's most insistent questions of who am I, what am I, why am I, how should I act, why should I be moral, just because we hit 50 years old, God willing. We're not going to stop wrestling with the meaning of life just because we've reached legal drinking age. It doesn't work like that. You don't stop looking for those answers, searching for meaning just because you have the car, you have the job, you have the family, you have your dreams. If anything, receiving your dreams makes you double down on trying to figure out what it all means to have what you've dreamt for so long become your present reality.
These warriors opposing the shadows are called psychics.
And so I'm glad Mob had Reagan, even though Reagan used him a lot. Something that is, a subtext point of contention that burns through and throughout the entire series, but it's also part of Reagan's character development that you are using this child, this very highly gifted child, for your own means to an end, but you do not own him. He calls you master, but he is not your slave. Still, I have to say that I'm glad that Reagan was in his life because an important aspect of spirituality and education is the motive or the driving force for teaching and learning. A lot of Reagan's driving force for teaching Mob, if we can even say that he did on an official level, was so that he can continue to use Mob, but it's also because Reagan recognized that too many people, including himself, think that they're a lot more special than they are, but they don't have the talents or the gifts or the potential to actually act that out or to actualize that. But here is Mob, who has it all on a spiritual level, but does not believe in himself enough, is plagued, is burdened by fear and insecurity, isolation, and the misunderstanding of who he is in society, even though he's not the only person in society like himself. When he starts to meet other people who are, like Teruki Hanazawa, his first true main antagonist, we see that Mob has these moments or these glimmers of the recognition that, like, if you don't get yourself in control of who you are, if you don't figure out your personal identity, your values, the meaning of your life, the responsibility you owe to yourself and to this world, you will become a tyrant. You will become this main character syndrome douchebag that thinks that the world revolves around you when you are an active and a small part of this very large thing we call existence. And then you will be humbled. You will be humiliated, and that's not what you want, especially when you have so much power. And I believe that we all have a lot of power. Not everyone is on the same level, right? Not everyone has the same ability or capability of doing the same things. But it is super important that we all recognize that even in the little or in the great that we are in possession of, we must understand what that means to us and balance it, be temperate when we compare it to everything and everyone else around us. Isn't that what Teru learned when he got mollywopped, dragged from the hell of the world to the heavens of the skies by Mob? Isn't that the reason why he understood, oh, okay, this is not how you should be treating people. This is not how you should be acting, turning people into your monkeys. You know, like, I know I'm focusing on Mob Psycho, but I want to deviate a little bit into My Hero Academia because I think that was Bakugo's biggest lesson. Bakugo, of course, is the Teru of his universe, and Izuku Midoriya is Shigeo Kageyama. But the thing that separated Deku from Bakugo is that Izuku recognized that he is here to help and to serve even in the little power that he had. And so when he's given great power, it just sharpens, it fine-tunes his identity, his drive, his vital energy to being a hero. And what Bakugo has to learn is that you, who has always had power, who has always been the main character of your story, of your life, of your small bubble of existence, are not the only one who is special and capable of doing great and mighty things. If anything, you are the one who needed to see that you barely scratched the surface of self-discovery. And because you refuse to look into your spirit and figure out who you are at this pivotal age, you have now a crossroads of decision to become a villain, because everyone already sees you as such, because you have not tempered your spirit. You are untamed and you are reckless and you are rude. You are a bully. Or you can humble yourself to the realization of someone else's journey who can actually inspire you to be a better person and therein a better hero. And so Bakugo's journey is about humbling himself to the power of, yes, one for all, but of his peer that he rejected as being useless, as being too timid to tower over him. And then he realizes that he must in turn lend aid to the actual hero of this story, because everyone who is a hero is a hero. But it's like, okay, so if we're all doing the same job, who are you as you show up in your role? And what I appreciate about Teru's character development is that after getting his ass handed to him, he learned very quickly, oh, so the world does not work like that. There's someone greater, there's someone better, and there always is. And yet, he doesn't even see it within himself. So I have to refashion my wig and and remind him of who he is. Because every single time I see Shigeo in this role of being the savior, of being the most powerful, I am reminded that I am in this world with him. So I have to do the things that propel him to his destiny, but also hold him back from his demise. And that's what Parker Palmer called love. An eminent educator and thought leader of spirituality and education. He said that love is not a soft and sentimental virtue, not as we use it in the context of spiritual education and spirituality within education. It's not this fuzzy feeling of romance, but it's actually tough love. And not tough love in, I'm going to be blunt and say whatever I want to say and hand it to you however it sees fit, but tough as in resilient, as in a connective tissue, something that withstands the test of time and the duress of reality. And Palmer says that we flee from it because we fear love's claim on our lives. And so in education, Western education especially, we push ourselves and our students to the confines of curiosity and control because we can create a knowledge that distances ourselves from each other and from the world. And that allows us to use things to disconnect ourselves from the spirit of all things, the interconnectedness of everything, and then we become the God of all things, the master creator. We become the Reagan. And instead of being the Reagan, Palmer says that spirituality is a knowledge that springs from love that will implicate us in the web of life. So just like what Mob says all the time, like, you can't do this alone. You can't be alone. You need friends. You need connection. You need people to belong, who see you and know you, and who are compassionate in your growth and your development, because that bond of awesome responsibility, of love, of connection, of sacred responsibility is what is considered to be transforming joy, because it calls us to be involved. It calls us into a mutual respect of accountability. And it is soul saving and world saving because it is compassion in action. Compassion has its place and it has its role and is super important in the classroom. And compassion does have its place in our personal lives and relationships. When Mob is grappling with his purpose, with his future, he enters Reagan's office saying, I feel alone. I don't know what to do with this power. Will you help me? And that is the posture of a student. And as educators, as senseis, we have to ask ourselves, when someone is so humble, as innocent as a child is who enters our learning environment, how do I show up for this student who has entrusted me with their mind and therein with their heart? So spirituality in education refers to a transcendence and compassion in the classroom that acknowledges the interconnectedness of the students, the sensei, and the subject. So the spiritual is that which can raise consciousness, stimulate awareness, foster creativity and imagination, connect us with grander issues of purpose and meaning, and facilitate connection with that which animates us. And the divine process begins with our willingness to allow the subject and the learners to engage our hearts, our minds, each time we begin the mind and soul expanding trek of adventure. The subject of this episode, spirituality and education, is super important because there is a war on education in the United States. There's a war on spirituality in the United States through the threat of white nationalism, white supremacy, and Christian theocracy. And it's super important for me to talk about this because even though I love, believe, and adhere to Jesus as my Christ and my spiritual master, I don't believe in the monopolization of Christianity as white evangelicalism and white nationalism perverts it in the United States. I do believe that if we are going to separate church and state, we need to do it in a way that brings in the inclusion of all religions to have a safe space to be in the classroom. And what I mean is, like, hijabis should be able to wear hijabs, right? Yarmulkes should be able to be worn. People should be able to show their religious expressiveness without being bombarded with rules and doctrines that impact their education, their welfare, their safety in school based off of another religion's dominance. But I think that spirituality is important in schools because spirituality can subsume all religious contexts and understandings, cultures, and learnings by focusing in on what matters to all of us, or what should matter to all of us, which is the welfare, the well-being of a child's mind, body, and soul. And so it's really difficult to see the way that book bans, which is a cutting off of knowledge seeking, is being pushed through the education systems of America on a state level. Because what is learning and knowledge without reading? What is the ability to search for meaning and purpose if you don't have a diversity of thoughts and considerations of those very questions, especially in fiction and nonfiction historically, when you can just erase your evils and your crimes against humanity because God said so, because Jesus is the way. But you're not showing that light and the life that is the Christ consciousness of Jesus. I worry about my nieces growing up in a state that can very easily turn from purple to red politically again and again and again and again, because that's where it was founded. I wonder how, as an antinatalist who is antinatalist because of my deep love and cherishing and protection of children, how this world is going to be if the creativity, the sacredness, and the transformative joy of learning in a classroom that is safe, that is imaginative, that is protected from guns, from hatred and bigotry, what that's going to look like in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 50 years from now. It terrifies me to think of a world that doesn't have people who are calling for a better education system, a more spiritually guided and rooted system of learning, connecting, and being. So that's why I think that the care of Mob's mind and Mob's spiritual gifts matter so much to me, because I remember being in middle school and kind of having a connection with my teachers, but really feeling like no one gets me, no one sees my greatness and like receives it and accepts it as being a gift. I had that in elementary school, and I think that elementary school is like this verdant garden for spirituality and education. But when we get into middle school, it feels kind of like walking into an alley at night and feeling like the puddles that are just smelling of piss and danger are pervasively surrounding me. Like, middle school is not the best time of life for a lot of students, and it's because a lot of students are losing their way because there aren't a lot of adults who know or desire to guide them in the path of righteousness for their sake. And by righteousness, I mean goodness, connection. And if we really deep it, spirituality isn't just love and light, right? There is a spiritual energy of antagonism, corruption, oppression, that evil is pervasive and wins a lot of the battles and wars because not a lot of people want to come up against it, whether out of fear or apathy or ignorance, I suppose, but it's there. And the spirituality of education in that regard is already moving through as hate campaigns. And so I want to counteract that. And I hope that if you're listening to this, there is a desire that has been sparked in you, or a flame that was like turning into an ember that has been reignited for you to do the same thing. And I'm not saying like go into the classroom, but be somebody, sensei. Find a young person in your life that trusts you, that wants to connect with you, and connect with them on a spiritual level of sacred understanding and seeing them for the full, whole human being that they are and are trying to become through guidance, respect, and action. So with that said, that wraps up another episode of the Anime and Spirituality podcast. I thank you all for this time of listening to me. Bell Hooks once said in a philosophy education essay she wrote that, it was really difficult for Black feminine voices to be heard in this world and for our works to reach the masses. And it's very disheartening to be ignored or to be drowned out by white male voices in this field. And just, non-Black woman, non-Black femme voices in general, that she said to put the work out anyway, to keep doing the work anyway. And that's what I'm doing with this podcast. And I hope that those who are listening, those who stay a while for the hour-long episodes that I am putting out, that you're gaining something from it, that your spirit, your soul is enriched by it, that your mind is growing in wisdom and in strength and insight, because that is the desire of my heart and my soul. The spirit that is speaking to you through this microphone into your headset wants you to know that you are cared for. If no one has told you that, you are loved. If no one has allowed you to believe that to be true, and you matter, so do good and be well. Until next time.